Okay, so here we are. We're checking out the opening movie from Bad Mojo. I'm Phil, the producer and one of the designers.
I'm Alex Louie. I'm one of the producers.
And I'm Vinny Corella, and the director and writer of this insanity.
So what we're looking at here is the opening movie. We did this to kind of pack in all of the different story elements that we needed to get in to tell the game. And we spent a lot of time on this movie. Our whole thing, at first, remember we conceived this thing as one, we wanted to do the whole thing as one shot, and we got over that pretty quickly, and the last vestige was that we did this as the opening. The 3D part is one continuous shot.
I think the bridge here is noteworthy because we built it in Swivel 3D. I mean, Drew Huffman did a great job with this. I mean, we built it in this software that was from like 1992.
Yeah, Drew built the bridge, and Charles Rose did this sequence. He's an illustrious man now working at Phil Tippett.
One of the reasons why I think the sequence is so long, especially in the beginning, is because we conceived this opening. We wanted to have this Apocalypse Now style opening monologue that would set the tone for the game and also pack in all this information. I remember really trimming this thing down and trying to get it tighter and tighter, but it was still so long. We needed this really long, push in over the city.
Look, there's Franz the cat. There he is. He just jumped out of the way. This is a big thing, like how we did getting in from the 3D building to the live action set, and we spent a lot of time on that, trying to figure out how to do that. There's Roger Sams, played by
Michael Summers.
Yeah.
My bags were all
and
packed and ready.
This is one of the rooms. This is one of the last rooms you see in the game. This is Roger's room.
We wanted to make sure that we got in all this information you had to use later, like the cat, which is a player in the game.
Bogart the cat. It's a nice cat.
So the opening movie has a lot of meaning in terms of gameplay, because if you pay attention and you really look at all these different things, it's going to help you get through the last section of the game.
Now look at this guy. He's hilarious. Look at this. When we saw his tape, when he did his screen test, we realized he's so over the top.
We were so worried about, because the movie sizes were small, that we wanted to make sure that all the emotion read and then you could see. I think that's why we chose him, was because his facial expressions are hilarious and so over the top.
Yeah, this is exaggerated.
Look, there's all that money. Remember, we printed up all that money. Our office manager was saying we could get in trouble because we were counterfeiting money. Here we go. What's this guy's name again?
His name is Eddie Bettito, and the character's name is Mike Gilliam. He's an old school actor who's acted with a lot of the great Jack Nicholson, and he's been around for a long time.
He was hilarious.
And he was really on the skids when we
And look at that. I love it because he just kept spitting in Michael Summers' face during this take.
I think it took a whole day to shoot this, if not 2 days, I think.
Yeah, I think it took 2 days, yeah. I mean, this is the set that we built in our offices, so this was built in a really small little area. We built this whole set to mimic, we built a lot of sets, but we built this one. This one wasn't mimicked really in 3D, but some of the other sets actually were built as 3D sets and live action sets.
I think it's funny here that he can see the money through the closed suitcase.
And then we had to get this thing, you might want to lock it.
We really worried about people missing the hints. We wanted to make sure there were hints in the opening movie.
It's pretty telegraphed, yeah.
We were so worried that the game was going to be unplayable and that people weren't going to understand what to do or how to do it, because it's pretty esoteric. It's not like a typical game.
Oh yeah, locket. The locket. We had this locket custom made by this jeweler guy, and he made it from a stopwatch?
From an old pocket watch, and we had to have it in a week, and it cost, I think, $1,600.
You got a lot of help for that.
When I looked at that necklace.
You probably could have went out to Toys R Us and bought something.
No, we used the locket a lot. It's in a lot of close-up shots, and it's really cool, and it has the air of antiquity to it. It looks really neat.
This is my favorite part when he turns into the half man, half roach. We call it Roach. Yeah. Remember that? We shot that.
The rehearsals
Michael Summers
was hysterical.
My brain
thanks to we had some cool special effects. Thanks to Daryl Flowers. Remember him?
I do.
Our grip, yeah. And here's a locket. That's Susan Vulcan in there. She's the the Oracle.
The interesting part here is this screen's upside down, and in the game we had to do it that way because we had to make it right side up in the game.
Yeah, we kept using this circle thing. There's circles throughout the game. Circles, circles, circles. Like the locket's a circle, his eye's a circle. We have a lot of eyes in the game, too. You're going to see all repetitive motif. This is the sewer chamber.
Love this high-resolution cockroach that we made.
Yeah.
Greg Smith made that cockroach.
Greg Smith. And now we're into the game itself.
Well, we knew we wanted to have a graphically rich game, but we also knew that the load times for CD-ROMs was a huge problem. So how do you load these graphically rich screens and not have a really long load times for the user? So we figured that if we had a really small sprite-based character, like a character 1 inch to 2 inches tall on screen, that we could sort of preload the screens based on where the character was moving and such, and what direction he was going in. Could we do a game with an insect? An insect is small. And what would be interesting? And, obviously we weren't going to do ladybugs or grasshoppers. We were thinking of things that had some edge to it. Scorpions, although scorpions aren't insects, but, spiders. It turned out that we all had some pretty harrowing cockroach stories. The president of Drew Pictures, Drew Huffman, and I both grew up in cockroach-infested households. I lived in New York and in a 2-family house, and at one point in time there were 17 Colombians living above us in a 1-bedroom apartment. So needless to say, it was very noisy up there, but also it was quite squalid, and we had just an incredible cockroach infestation in the house. I mean, I remember routinely waking up at night as a child with cockroaches crawling on my face. They were always in the bathtub, they were always in the kitchen sink, they were in the stove, they were everywhere. I mean, there were just cockroaches all over the place. Drew had several harrowing cockroach stories, but one of the most interesting and hilarious and also disgusting was the fact when he woke up with just an agonizing headache in the middle of the night that he thought was a brain tumor. And he heard this, the way he describes it, like the sound of a kettle drum in his ear. And he was rushed to the hospital by his mother, and in the emergency room they discovered that he had a baby cockroach in his ear. This thing is like microscopically small. It's as big as a pinhead, if you've ever seen a baby cockroach. And this thing was dancing around Drew's eardrum, pounding on it and causing him just great pain. They had to extract this tiny cockroach out of his ear with a crazy forceps or whatever. And we just laughed uproariously at that. And we ran around the table that day, and everyone in the room had some sort of harrowing cockroach story. I think Drew's infestation might have been a little bit worse than ours. He told a story one time about how he went to the beach with his family on a vacation, to get away from it all. And they took all these wonderful snapshots of the family on the beach, and they were really, quaint, and him and his mom and his brother digging sandcastles and the whole thing. And when they developed the film, this crazy thing happened. There were these silhouettes of cockroaches on the photographs themselves, and they were crystal clear. The cockroaches were living inside of his camera. And every single picture had these silhouettes of cockroaches, sort of bordering these shots of like kids with their arms around each other and laughing and grinning. They've got like popsicles in their hands. It really, I don't think people would even believe it if you put that in a movie. And we began to think, what? All people have had encounters with cockroaches. We realized it was like this universal thing, and it did have the edge we were looking for. It did allow us to use the sort of small sprite kind of thing. And also there were these great urban myths that were circulating then, and I guess still now. After the nuclear holocaust, the only creatures that would survive would be cockroaches, and cockroaches will outlive us all, and there are these miracles of evolution. And we did some research into that. I talked to entomologists at Purdue University who specialize in cockroach abatement, the people up at S.C. Johnson Wax up in Racine, Wisconsin, which make the Raid, the roach spray Raid.
You got to respect these animals. They can take a lot. They're incredibly resilient, and I think that they're gross, but they're also kind of majestic in a way.
Do not fear me, little one.
Remember those Raid commercials with those little cartoony roaches, and they're giggling and laughing and doing all that kind of crazy stuff? I mean, the game was originally going to be this funny thing.
The game was about kind of being gross, and it was It was meant to be sort of a parody.
And they were going to have, characterizations and funny voices, and they were going to like just crawl on your toothbrush and gross you out, and they were going to, in a way, it was almost going to be like roaches getting back at man kind of thing.
When Vin and I got involved in it, we took a different approach. We were both big fans of David Lynch, and I think Blue Velvet had just come out, or it was right around that time, and we wanted to make it weird. So we tried to make it dark and creepy, and our overall vibe was, when in doubt, make it strange.
We didn't want this to be a typical game. We always wanted to make a game that was a little bit more mature and that conveyed something a little bit more literate than just, killing dragons or smoting monsters or whatever.
We're both inspired by Kafka's Metamorphosis, about this guy that, through some mysterious circumstance, gets changed or transformed into a cockroach. We wanted there to be some sort of classic backstory to the whole game. We tied the cockroach to a guy who gets turned into a cockroach. And because of that, we wanted to know why. Why was he turned into a cockroach? What were what's the point of this whole thing? And ultimately, we referred to Joseph Campbell and a hero at the Thousand Faces and put him on a quest.
One of the classic hero's quests is the son's search for the father. He doesn't understand who he is, where he comes from, or how he got the way he was until he turns into a cockroach. As a cockroach, he gets to look at things from a point of view he couldn't look at it from before. We knew we wanted this to be this gritty, dark, edgy, disgusting world, just like a real roach's world.
I mean, this was a gross game.
Anything that's gross or disgusting has this kind of self-developing notoriety.
In the beginning, we got totally caught up in this. One of the first things we thought about was the kitchen of this bar/restaurant, because we worked in a restaurant.
One of the hard parts about doing a game in 1995 was that, on a PC especially, was that we were working in a 256 color environment.
We wanted it to be hyper-realistic. We wanted it to be exactly like you were a cockroach. The stainless steel countertops and the tile floor and all this spilled grease and bacon and all these things that we had seen cockroaches crawling on when we were busboys in this restaurant.
We tried doing everything in the 3D applications, and we were discovering that, at the time, 3D applications were a lot more primitive than they are now.
I had a Power Mac 8100 that had 96 megs of RAM, and that was the most RAM anyone had ever heard of in a computer. I think the RAM cost more than the computer cost.
We telescoped out our work schedule at that point and figured we would have been done with the show about now.
We were never really good at planning things out. Really, our backgrounds were as filmmakers, and we were good at making something visually compelling. We created this little cardboard jig, that was basically a screen. And we would take this jig and we'd move it around and look at things and look at the floor and put it over objects and on countertops, getting on our hands and knees. In fact, getting on our bellies and crawling. Looking at the floor and thinking about how cool it would be to show this, how cool it would be to show that. We call it driving the roach. So rather than sit down and come up with a design document, which you would do today, you would probably spend months and months in development just on creating a design document that would tell the artists and the engineers what to do. We didn't do that. And we test an idea out visually just to see how something would navigate or how something would look, how it would work, how we would light it, how it would play on screen.
It's actually a big pain just to develop colors that were kind of close to each other so we could have something that looked good in 256 colors.
We wanted the player to be able to explore every square inch of this apartment building, everything, and just explore. Let's let the person go out and explore everything, underneath the rug, underneath the table, under the hot water heater. Every wall, every ceiling, every floor, every table, every chair, everything was going to be navigable. We quickly realized that this was just going to, for two reasons, was just not going to work. First of all, the artwork would never fit on one CD. We knew we wanted it to be on one CD. It would take forever for us to produce it. And also, it would just be too boring. Navigating across a giant cinder block wall sucks. It's not fun.
Vinny and I were looking at the notes that we had early on. We had health meters and we had inventory, and you were going to hook up with other roaches and breed, and there was a lot of asset or resource management in the game. And ultimately what happened was we were essentially a year out and we were still figuring out what the game was, and so we said, let's strip away all that stuff. It's all gone.
Phil and I reached the point where we had said, okay, enough's enough. We can spend 6 weeks modeling a stick, or we can just go out down the block and take a picture of one. And that's where the kind of the infusion between the 3D and the photographic stuff started developing. This was high concept. We ran out of time, and we decided that, well, he's getting closer to being a real human being. He should have photographic stuff around him to kind of show his journey. Basically, we punted.
We came up with the concept of what we called islands of activity. So the gameplay would take place in these little islands, and you would traverse from island to island with your cockroach. So you wouldn't have to go through 30 screens of blank floor to get to the next island. You would go across 3. So we kind of truncated the world, and took some shortcuts.
The whole game takes place in this San Francisco waterfront dingy bar, Eddie Petito's bar. And we locked ourselves in a room for, I don't know how long it was, 2 weeks, a week, I forget. And we just hashed out the whole game.
The hallmark of an adventure game is that there's a puzzle. The player has to solve some sort of visual riddle in the game world in order to move on to the next level.
We would draw it all out on paper, and sometimes I would make massing models in Swivel. I would just mock up what we thought the room would look like and what you were going to do.
We hated the idea of puzzles that were removed from the natural game environment. We wanted to make sure that all of the puzzles were seamlessly integrated into the game environment, so you were never removed from it. So everything was restricted by what could a cockroach really do?
A cockroach can only do so many things.
Ultimately, it was 4 keys. You drive a roach, that's it. And we did that, ultimately, I think we did it at first because we felt it was our safest bet to get the game done. But as a side effect, it allowed us as designers to, it set up a bunch of limitations for us, but that was good because it corralled us to thinking about only like what we could do as a roach.
I remember just pulling our hair out trying to think of things that roaches could do.
It wasn't much. You could push things, you could, the weight of the roach could cause you to do things.
A lot of the puzzles in Bad Mojo are what we called like these Rube Goldberg-esque Byzantine sort of action-reaction puzzles where you do something on one screen that has an effect on something many screens in the future or somewhere else in the game. On every level in the game are animals.
This guy's house is just filled with critters. There's like slugs, there's mice, there's termites, there's silverfish, there's ants. It's packed full of stuff.
And all the animals were in some fashion enchanted, and they had information that they were able to give you, the cockroach, to help you on your journey. Phil and Vinny and I would go and sit down, and Vinny would have written a riddle by this time that was kind of pseudo-poetic, and we would try to fit the assets we had, for instance, vacuum cleaners or rats or cockroaches or whatever, into a kind of a dreamlike, kind of pre-Big Lebowski sort of montage of visual and audio clues.
We use movies, clues, written text, objects. In some cases, the player interacts with photographs. And from very early on, we really love this idea of living photographs. You would see a photograph and you'd crawl over it, and that would cause a small movie to play, within the bounds of the photograph itself. And you'd see this little snippet, this little moment from the life of the character in the photograph. The biggest problem in creating this game wasn't the design, and it wasn't financing it, and it wasn't figuring out how to get it, to work on the screen. It was, how does a group of people with completely different personalities, some of which really shouldn't even be together in the first place, how do we get along? How do we build a team?
Everything that's good, you kind of have to have a lot of bad things happen to make things even better.
If you work on a good movie or a movie that was fun, or a game that was fun to create, it'll turn out like crap.
I say discussions, but they were actually yelling matches.
We're going to call Drew right now. We're calling him down to this conference room, and we're reading him the riot act.
One time I remember just hearing all this commotion and banging and stuff, and I didn't know what was going on, but I found out after the fact that I guess Drew was, it seemed like he was having a heart attack or something.
He blew his stack. He went nuts. He was screaming at us. He was going nuts. It was insane. Like, we saw a side of this man that we had never seen, I never want to see again. And he was like under such pressure to get this thing done. And
And afterwards, Vinny and I were just like, oh my God, what did we do?
December 6th, 1994. Things are beginning to slip after more than 10 months have been spent planning and producing this project. 10 months. We're still lacking a clear engineering plan and a production schedule. I'm relying too heavily on other people to do it, and this is causing my feeling of desperation. I mean, I can't believe I wrote this in a notebook. This is like my diary. The only time that I really felt like I had real control was in the production of the video portion of the game. But actually, really, I didn't actually have any control at all, but I had a great relationship with Phil and with Aaron Strain and with Jonathan Fishman. Those guys were doing all the work. So it was really when I kind of gave control away to people that I trusted that I felt like I was in the most control. And that was when I had fun.
We had a set designer build the exact replica of that CG model that I had built, you know, in full size, where we could film these live action sequences.
It was very eerie to be going through and seeing this stuff that you painted and kind of grossed yourself out on. And there it was, in, you know, as big as life.
You know, when you play the game, you see us going between these things. In most cases, it's pretty seamless, and it works.
We had these off-angle shots, which were kind of Moses goes to the mountaintop shot, which would tell you where you were in the game. We spent a lot of time taking the textures that we had just created, you know, faux tabletops, 50s matchbooks, bills, eviction notices, and translating them from the game into real tangible objects that the actors could manipulate or act around and things like that.
In terms of casting, we got really lucky because, you know, we didn't have any money. We weren't going to go to a traditional casting agency and get real talent. Who is it? We had to rely on local San Francisco theatrical talent that would work for scale.
Some nerve coming up here at this hour.
So it was just potluck. Who would walk in the door that we could kind of latch onto and picture as these people? So we had every jamoke from all these theater companies in San Francisco coming in here and auditioning for us, and they were hilarious. Some of these people were just terrible. Or some of them were good stage actors, but just it wasn't going to work for the game.
I'd get suckered into actually playing a part as a stand-in just to block out a scene or something like that.
Jeez, let me in here. What's going on? What do you want?
It's terrible. I mean, I'll never win an Oscar.
We were lucky that we found Michael Summers and Mike Gilliam and Susan Volkin, people who were cheap, who fit the roles well, and who were really easy to work with and took direction with.
There's a shadow from your face is falling onto Mike's face. So
try to stay over.
No, I don't want you to cheat over too far because then we get to that same problem we had before. Just keep your head back. I like you guys close together, but just a little bit more, a little bit back.
Oh, that's fine.
You know, Michael Summers, when he walked in that day, I knew it. You know, I think he was the last guy we saw. He was late for his audition. He was an absolute mess. You know, he was all over the place.
Who is it?
And he had this just beautiful. We fell in love with him physically. Was he the right guy for the role of Roger Sams? Probably not. If you look at the movies and you look at the way he acts, I mean, he's like this Buster Keaton-esque, Chaplin-esque guy. He's a lot like Jim Carrey, you know, and he bills himself that way. He's a physical, comedic type actor. He's long, he's lanky, he's got these just vivid facial expressions, and when he acts, that's how he acts. His body acts. He moves all over the place. His eyes bug out of his head. His arms, his hands, his shoulders, every part of his body is involved in every one of his scenes. And when you look at the opening movie, we were looking at it last night, we were just laughing hysterically. It's so over the top, which was always our mantra in game production. It was just like over the top, over the top, over the top, because these movies were so small and they were compressed, you know, down to like these blurry little things. We were never sure that the characters' emotions were going to read through. So we always told everyone to just go crazy, go full bore, give it to us all, you know, and it worked, I guess.
The space that we were doing the shooting in was really susceptible to a lot of noise. There was a big parking lot outside. We were right by a freeway off-ramp. A lot of good takes got really ruined because of that, unfortunately. Right outside of the room that we were in were the bathrooms. And, you know, every time somebody flushed the toilet, the pipes would start knocking.
At first, we collected animals on our own. I remember a very early experiment we did with spiders on the blue screen. We found some spiders, brought them into the studio, put them on the blue screen, and I remember the first spider, vaporized instantly under the lights. It was just gone in a puff of smoke. So we had to adjust the lights and figure that out. And we had like a little piece of glass, and the spider was crawling on the glass. That was not going to work. Filming spiders was just not going to work.
If we're going to make a game about cockroaches, we needed to know what cockroaches look like, how they behaved, what they did. And so we had all kinds of... We had a little zoo at the office.
So the first place we got animals was the South Carolina Biological Supply Company, which is this wonderful catalog and website where you can buy things for the classroom. And in that catalog was something that just made our eyes light up. There was the Cockroach Kit. Ostensibly, a classroom would study the life cycle of a cockroach, and kids would watch it or whatever. I don't know what the hell this thing would be used for. They would send you 6 cockroaches in a little cup with some paper towels in it. We bought one of these cockroaches kits and created this terrarium of horrors.
You'd always keep a little water in the bottom for them to drink, and then they ate dog food. So I had this bag of dog food, and every week I'd put a little more dog food in there. And we'd get to watch them. We'd get to watch them live and eat and multiply.
It got gross in a hurry.
We must have had 2,000 cockroaches in this little aquarium that was sealed on top. And
we'd point out the little pregnant ones, and we'd see the little egg sacs, and we'd watch them hatch and these babies, and then it was amazing.
Just a squalid, horrible environment.
I needed to clean out this cage and get the dead ones out and clean the roach poo out of it and everything. So if you open it up, they all run out. So what I figured out is if I took the little terrarium and stuck it in the freezer for about 15-20 minutes, all the live ones would all hide and huddle into these wooden slats and start moving really slow and protect themselves. Then I'd go up to go out to the street, out to a garbage can, and I could shake out all the dead ones and hose out the little bottom of the terrarium and put them back in. So I did this for like a year, and they just wouldn't stop, living.
And we had these cockroaches in there that we would study. The artist would sit there, look at the cage, look at how the roach moves, look at the sheen on the back of the roach's, carapace and stuff, and we'd watch the roach move and how it would tip and roll. And I mean, that's how we got the roach to look the way it looked, was, with these Carolina biological cockroaches.
They gave me some mice to play with, basically. So I brought my remote recorder over there and tried to get sound out of one mouse. And it took some coaxing, but I was able to get some squeaks.
I did not want there to be this stiff-looking rubber rat. Didn't want to make a rat in 3D. At the time, you couldn't do fur or hair in 3D. It just wasn't doable. And it had to be hyper-realistic. So I knew that we would have to get a live rat. Did not want a pet shop rat, not a white one, not a black one. Wanted a real Norway rat.
And one day, as a practical joke, Vinny brought this bag in. And it was a paper bag, and it had one of these little cat toys in it that rolls around. It's like a little ball that goes all crazy. And he's like, I got a rat. And he throws it on the floor, and it just takes off and starts skidding around, and people were just freaking out. They really thought it was a rat.
It was our original goal not to harm any animals during the production of the game.
There was this awful, awful day where it wasn't awful, it was just gross, okay? Vinny got a dead rat.
I called various exterminating companies here in the city, and I said, listen, this is going to sound crazy, but I'm shooting a movie here in the city. I need a rat that's been freshly killed. Can you get me one? 9 out of 10 people hung up on me. I got a call. Came like 12 o'clock in the afternoon one day. There was the exterminator truck sitting in front of a restaurant. There was this big Aussie, this Australian guy, who was the exterminator. Oh, we got a big one here for you. This guy's huge. We found him in a crate of cantaloupe. What do you want me to do with it, mate? And I was like, I can't use it alive. So he takes the rat, and smashes it against the side of his pickup truck. Just like, and kills it. It's dead. Here you go. We put it in a Ziploc bag. We raced back to the office as if we were holding like some kidney for organ transplantation.
We took pictures of the rat in every single possible pose. I think that very few Victoria's Secret models get the kind of love that this rat did, because we knew that it was going to rot and stink by the end of the day.
We only harmed animals that were sort of on death row anyway. I mean, we went to a a fish market in Chinatown in San Francisco for the catfish. And, you know, if you've ever been to one of these places, there are all these squalid tanks where there are like soft-shell turtles and various types of fish and delicacies. And in one tank was just a big tank full of catfish. And I remember saying, I need 2 catfish. The guy didn't speak English. We were communicating with hand gestures. And I was like, no, alive. Because they were going to kill them right there for us. I said, no, I want them alive. You want them alive? So yeah, then they had some conference behind the counter as to whether or not they could give us live catfish, and they finally agreed to give us live catfish. We put them in a bag, brought them home, and I wound up beheading and gutting the fish myself, which we have on video, I believe. But, you know, those catfish were going to be killed right there in an awful way by that Chinese butcher. So I don't really feel bad about killing the catfish. It wasn't like, you know, there was no chance of there being a born free moment here. So we had a cat trainer come in, and she brought 3 cats with her in cages, and we would evaluate the cats that day to find out which cat was behaving, you know, well enough to actually work that day. Because they get all moody, they're insane, they're cats. And they don't feed these things, you know, the day before the shoot, and they perform based on reward. You know, they love these little chunks of smoked turkey, and that's how they do their little things. And, you know, it was a huge deal. We paid more attention to this cat and the various issues revolving around this cat than any other, like, talent-related issue. You know, there was a huge debate as to whether or not we needed cat insurance.
That's a very hairy cat.
From that day onward, any boondoggle-esque ridiculous issue was referred to as the cat insurance issue. Like, if anyone went down some ridiculous trail, we were like, hey, man, that's just cat insurance.
When you're working on a game, the first year and a half, you really kind of don't know what you're doing. You're kind of fumbling around in the dark with your concept.
I don't think any of us really knew what, you know, the public was going to think of it.
We had missed Christmas, and it was kind of, you know, it was pretty depressing at that point.
When we merged with Pulse Entertainment toward the tail end of production, it gave us the steam we really needed to complete the game. I mean, there was a level of organization and an impetus there that kind of lit the fire on us to push us over the finish line.
When we finally shipped the game in January, that was like the greatest thing, because I'd just gotten physical like a couple of months ago, and my blood pressure was like extraordinarily high.
So we went on the road to demo and promote Bad Mojo.
Whenever we would go to trade shows, we'd take like a jar of roaches with us.
We had a pickle jar with 2 Madagascar hissing cockroaches in it. And these things, you know, they're gigantic. They're like this big, and they hiss, and they're pretty ugly. And I mean, this day, you could never imagine walking through the airport with a giant pickle jar full of cockroaches. We put them in the overhead bin, you know, and like every once in a while during the flight, we'd go in there and check, make sure they were okay.
It would repel people. Some people would just see it and they'd run away in fear. But it would draw other people in. It was a great conversation piece.
We were in a hotel in Chicago, and the cockroaches escaped the jar,
and they ran off somewhere, and we couldn't find them.
And we were just shitting. Imagine the next person who comes into this hotel room and finds 2 gigantic Madagascar cockroaches. We turned that hotel room upside down. We were panicking. But we found them. The 2 cockroaches had like wedged their way into a little, you know, fold in the shower curtain, and we found them in there. It was hilarious.
You know, when we first started out, I couldn't see this thing winning an award, because I was like, oh my God, you know, in the thick of it, it was like really dark, and I couldn't see my way out of the tunnel.
The game sold a lot of copies, I believe over 1 million copies.
I couldn't believe how many awards we actually won. We got a lot of Envision awards for the writing, for the art direction. I mean, it was just a fabulous looking game. In 1995 with 8-bit color, I mean, it was just incredible.
We were on TV, that was really cool.
How'd you like to wake up one morning to find out that you'd been turned into a cockroach?
Something crazy happened when I looked at that necklace.
That's what happens to Roger Sams in Pulse Entertainment's Bad Mojo, priced at $59.95. You play the nasty character at the heart of this grotesque but engrossing new computer game. And this is also you, the roach Roger's turned into. You'll be living life as a cockroach until you figure out a way to change yourself back into a man.
Maybe you like the cockroach idea,
Some
okay?
people
Which
like
is
it.
fine. We won't think bad of you if you do.
Very funky, very addictive, not for the squeamish.
The people in charge of the company gave us freedom to do, you know, whatever we want, and I think it shows in the end product of the game. You don't see a lot of games like that anymore. You know, there's a real formula to games now. There are these first-person shooters, there are these fighting games, these RPGs, but you just don't see anything that sort of out there and bizarre. And I mean, I can compare it to like an independent film or something like that. That's kind of what it reminds me of. It's like sort of the Being John Malkovich.
We're actually in the Macworld Game Hall of Fame. We won an MVP award from PC Magazine. We developed a French and a German version as well as Japanese version. So we would go into the recording studio and we'd actually look at these actors and direct them to do basically the same video with Roger and Eddie. It was just hilarious to hear them speaking in long German words in a movie we'd seen 1,000 times. The sync is kind of there, kind of not. You know, you can't look at a Caucasian person speaking Japanese and think, wow, this is great stuff.
Wasn't rocket science. Okay, it was just us having fun when we were working 12-hour days and we were totally burnt out and goofy.
It was a close-knit bunch. I mean, we all had our roles, and they were very defined, you know.
I think one of the greatest things about doing this game was all the relationships I developed.
Thinking back on the whole production environment, it's a fun time that I you know, you don't run into a group like that very often, you know. And in my work later, you know, I haven't been that close with other people that I've worked with. It was a really cool, you know, old warehouse building that we worked in San Francisco with, you know, old friends that I've known for a long time.
Working with Drew and Phil and Vinny was like the best opportunity I could have.
At the end of the game, I had this terrarium where it must have had like hundreds of thousands of roaches. I mean, it was pretty big. It started with 12, and it was sort of, I didn't really know what to do with it. It was like, God, you know, if I took this thing and just opened it up in the basement of some building, I could, you know, condemn a friggin' building, you know? So, didn't want to do that. So what I ended up doing was what we call the roach genocide. I took an entire can of Raid and just sprayed the entire can of Raid into this terrarium and then just duct taped the whole thing closed and stuck it in a dumpster. And what else are you going to do with, you know, 100,000 cockroaches?
I would really like to actually work on another game, like another version of Bad Mojo, and just kind of bring the band back together.